Hello everyone, welcome to yet another day in this The Clown Decade, the decade where things are only going to get worse before they get better. And once again, if you want to keep up with all things Clown Decade, please do subscribe to the channel and of course become a channel member. Right, it's finally here, the budget is here, nobody's happy with it. Literally every single podcast I was listening to about the budget pretty much said the same thing. This was an absolute disaster class of politics. You could not put out a worse budget if you tried. Maybe the Greens could, actually. Everyone's basically in the same boat. This is classic tax and spend Labour. This is all because, as I've been covering for the past few weeks, it's a matter of when, not if, Starmer and Reeves are going to go, and they are basically throwing out this budget for their own political interest to stay in power, rather than actually do anything that they particularly wanted, because all Starmer really wants to do is have human rights laws implemented. Well, that's incredibly unpopular at the moment, so why even bother? Because he wants to effectively be the lawyer-in-chief, and Rachel Reeves, I basically think, has imposter syndrome and wants to prove to everyone that she can actually be a good chancellor. Well, she's had two budgets, both have been awful, and over the two budgets, they've had to raise 70-odd billion pounds in taxes, while increasing spending by something crazy. Estimates are looking at over 100 billion. Meaning that taxes did go up, borrowing did go up, spending did go up, and that is the complete opposite of everything you heard during the election. But there will be plenty more to say about that in due course. On top of that, the OBR budget forecasts were leaked 40 minutes before the budget actually went out. Apparently it's because it was set to be scheduled to be sent out and they set it 2 hours early for some reason. And the guilt briefly went parabolic. And the funny thing was is that people didn't really care about Rachel Reeves' speech after the OBR dropped, because frankly Rachel Reeves is quite hard to listen to these days. To be fair, says me. But on top of that, we pretty much knew everything that was going to be in the budget anyway, because all of it got leaked over the past couple of months. And even with that, brace for the worst, the markets are going down, the pound's slipping, as I have covered before. I mean, this is what happened to the US bond markets, because most of the bond markets are joined at the hip, given we're in such a globalist world. A bit of a drop initially, and then the gilt yields go back up. Again, they're already high, they've pretty much stabilised, and it's because over the past month, all these leaks have showed that Britain's going to be yet again a bit of a basket case. Again, by the metrics of Liz Truss, Rachel Reeves has crashed the economy, but we're not using that anymore because it's Labour in charge, despite the fact that this is the most unpopular government ever. Clearly, the media at the very least still see the Tories as a complete basket case who don't know what they're doing, but despite all this, it is worth saying that Kemi Badenoch's response to the budget speech was actually the highlight of the day. There was an awful lot of making fun of Rachel Reeves, saying that she's mansplained to, saying woman to woman, you're actually terrible at the job. I'm paraphrasing, of course. Along with plenty of easy criticism that you have against this budget, because it is a typical Labour budget, and on top of that, they were basically given a month to actually get a speech together. You just get bullet points together and then you rearrange them into whatever order you want, effectively, because everything kept being leaked. And then just before the budget or while it's being announced, you cross off bits that you don't need. Honestly, it was a gift to the Tories. This is part of the reason you don't leak the budget, by the way, so the opposition doesn't have an absolute field day on the opposition benches. But no, Starmer and Reeves are incompetent, so they gave them an open goal. Nigel Farage and Zia Youssef also had a response to the budget. They had their own press conference. I had a load of press in there. Gave a good speech as usual. It's all the usual. We need to be pro small business, pro entrepreneur, pro actual working people, rather than, say, paraphrase, benefit scroungers, than we are compared to this Labour government. Because honestly, again, what is happening is that your tax thresholds are all being frozen, while literally every benefit is going up in line with inflation, or if you've got the triple lock, going up by the amount you paid out to the public sector. It's about 5% or something silly. We'll go into detail, obviously. But basically what you're being told by this government is join the public sector or go on benefits. That's the only way you're going to get anywhere, when realistically, as we've seen time and time again throughout history, it is the private sector that actually create the wealth, which is what reform are all about. And you don't have to be a massive corporation, you can do it by being an entrepreneur, and hopefully becoming a massive corporation. Anyway, I'm not going to go through all the responses, because obviously you can see it for yourself with links down in the description, and what this video is really about is, well, going through what's in the actual budget, and after the precursor of this has been absolutely skewered by literally everyone, I've not even particularly seen the left-wingers be happy about this. Clive Lewis was interviewed by the Daily T, and he basically said the tax rises don't go high enough and we need more benefits because there are people in my constituency eating sand. And while all this is happening, 100,000 Brits are leaving the country every quarter and are being replaced by 3 times the amount of non-EU migrants. And guess what this budget is going to do? Make this trend even worse. It's got to a point where I know people who don't even have passports who have openly said, yeah, I'm thinking of leaving the country. Someone who has never been abroad, by the way. A good friend of mine. That's how bad things have gotten. I'm sure big fans of this channel will know who I'm talking about. But anyway, let's get into the budget. The summary over at the Times is a very good source. So the key points: income tax. The thresholds have been frozen for another 3 years until 2030 and 31, which will push more people into higher rates of income tax as wages rise. And also on top of that, minimum wage, I may as well talk about it, it's right there. That's been increased by 4.1% to £12.71 an hour, and has been confirmed. The national minimum wage rate for those aged between 18 to 20 will increase by 8.5% to £10.85 an hour. Now, even with the last budget and the increase to minimum wage, you had people on minimum wage working full-time, paying income tax. What this has done is potentially even made part-time workers with high hours start to actually pay into income tax, which again is absolutely absurd. The whole theme of Rachel Reeves' budget speech was contribution. We want more people contributing. And number one, I'm fed up of contributing. I think I've contributed enough, actually. Thank you very much. I say that as someone on medium wage, though next year I might not be on medium wage given how much wages have risen for the public sector. I'm going to be very salty about that, by the way. On top of that, minimum wage has gone up yet again. I just worked it out, by the way, and as a professional in software, I'm making not an awful lot more than minimum wage, than what you'd expect anyway. It's getting very close to basically having to look abroad for jobs. Not to necessarily move, because it's very easy to work remotely in software, but ultimately that is, at least I'm extracting wealth, I guess, from other countries, but ultimately I want to help businesses in Britain. And I'm not necessarily doing that if I'm throwing my labour elsewhere, but at least I guess I'm helping out with the British economy. It's a shame it's taxed to hell. And on top of that, this is actually breaking a manifesto pledge. Rachel Reeves said she will not be extending the freeze to these thresholds because it taxes workers. And so she then froze the threshold. And again, fiscal drag, blah, blah, blah. This is going to pull people into this. The 40% tax rate that's at 100-odd thousand originally was, when it was brought in by Nigel Lawson, was supposed to affect the top 1% of earners, if that. And it's now affecting way more people, and then people obviously salary sacrifice, but I won't get into that yet. And you basically have to end up sacrificing your monthly income to save for the future. Which, okay, good to encourage that to some degree, but it's getting ridiculous in some ways. There's like 2 tax cliffs. I think there's one at 50,000 to 60,000. Okay, salary sacrifice to 49,000, whatever. Then, oh, we'll have to pay you 65k. Okay, whack it up again. Wow, that's a massive pay rise. And then there's another one from, I think, 100,000 to 120 or 125,000. Where, yeah, you have to wait for an actual massive monthly pay rise while the rest of it goes into your pension, which, again, still your money, I suppose, but ultimately is causing malinvestment because you are salary sacrificing more than you would have otherwise, and then that's money that you would take in monthly to spend or save in other ways now, or maybe even invest. So malinvestment as a result of that. But that's Britain through and through, and we've known for ages. In fact, I'd suggest you actually listen to the Times Radio Politics Andrew Neil segments, because he made a great point. What this budget has actually done is consolidated the worst economy we've had for a century, which is the post-COVID economy, which is quite incredible because obviously the big manifesto pledges from Labour was this was a time for change. Well, you're not changing anything if you're just consolidating the tax and spend post-budget policies. And this is what I have to constantly tell left-wingers. You got your world. You know, austerity, which was never really austerity because spending never really went down. Having said that, taxes went up and the budget went down, and the deficit, went down, but nobody ever refers to austerity as that. They just mean spending cuts. You then have Theresa May and every Tory after that who don't do anything close to what Reform are promising, which was what was actually promised. Spending kept going up, taxes kept going up, our free market index kept going down as a result of policy, and then you hit COVID, that all gets put on steroids. There's still even COVID funding going into the NHS, I believe. And from there, you've got Labour saying, that's all good, we complain about all that though, so let's make it even worse. And again, why? It's at the behest of their backbenchers because they want to keep this government going. And with this budget, they will probably last until May, rather than having a leadership contest in December. Having said that, with some budgets by the weekend, this all unravels, and it could be putting them in an even worse position than when they started. And this is everything I have to say, and we're only on the first 2 points. This is quite a long article, so with that in mind, let's carry on. Actually, no, I need to mention another thing. It was floated out there that income tax may be increasing while national insurance comes down by the same rate, so that workers do not have to pay any more income tax, but landlords and pensioners would. I'm actually in favour of that, by the way, and we didn't even get that, because that would technically be breaking a manifesto pledge. You broke one anyway, you may as well have gone whole hog, and I can be happy knowing that landlords and pensioners are paying the same income, or close to the same income tax as me. So, pensions. Pension contributions made through salary sacrifice scheme above the annual 2,000 threshold will no longer be free of national insurance contributions from April 2029. The measure is expected to raise $4.7 billion in 2029 to 2030. Okay, at least we're 3 years off that. But I was touching on this before. It is now the choice of this government that saving for the future, making your salary sacrifice, okay, partially to avoid tax, sure, but either way, doing this to save for the future, which they should be encouraging, is now no longer being encouraged. It's just crazy. It's still probably more worth salary sacrificing because you don't pay income tax on it. However, it's still just such a demoralising tax. What, I save so that I avoid your stupid taxes to now have to pay a tax for saving this money that I was trying to do to avoid paying your stupid taxes. And again, it's all because of the ideology of Labour. You tax people because people totally can't move. People aren't going to react to this. It's all going to stay the same. And instead, you're going to take all that money that the OBR totally gets right all the time and spend it all on what? Well, I suppose I will wait to get into that. Mansion tax. Annual surcharge will be applied to homes valued at more than $2 million from April 28. The measure is expected to raise $400 million in 29 to 30. Oh, peanuts. Peanuts, and again, what does the mansion tax do? Basically, you have to pay annual payments to the government for owning a home more than $2 million. Now, you might be thinking, well, who owns a home over $2 million? Rich people. No, not necessarily, because the market is so whack. You will have had people who bought a home for about £20,000, I don't know, somewhere in, Wandsworth, let's say, as an example. I don't know if this is an accurate example, where it was quite a rundown area, and then over the years it's turned into actually quite a high value area. And from there, the house you bought for $20,000 is now $2 million over 40 years or whatever. And that's the other question. When are we considering the valuation of the house? Is it recent? Is it from the 90s? Is it from the 2000s? Devil in the detail on this, and from what I could tell, nobody really has an answer and nobody really knows. And then, obviously, on top of that, you might be a pensioner in this house, and okay, fair enough to downsize, but if we're forcing people to downsize, can you take away the stamp duty? No, because they want to tax and spend. Inheritance tax. The million allowance for the 100% rate of agricultural property relief and business property relief will be transferable between spouses and civil partners. That helps the farmers out a bit. But they were still pretty mad, went to a protest, and one guy got arrested. I believe Reform are giving him legal aid, so well done Reform there. So on to the big benefits. A two-child benefit cap. The two-child benefit cap has been scrapped from 2026. The measure is expected to cost $2.3 billion in 26-27 and $3 billion by 29 to 30. One thing actually we need to point out here, a lot of the taxes are being introduced, from 28 to 29? A lot of the taxes, apart from income tax and minimum wage, are coming in after the two-child benefit cap is being removed. How do you justify that? That's going to lead to very much increased borrowing. I mean, I have a lot of problems with the benefit cap, well, with benefits in general, obviously. I'm with reform. The only time you should get a two-child benefit, or any benefit for having children, is if both parents are working. Some exceptions, obviously, say if one of the parents is in care or a full-time carer. Basically, as long as they're being productive, even toward their own family, I don't see a problem. And if I have people in the comments saying, what if you want to be a full-time housewife? Very few women actually do that. Part of the reason we want the trad tax is so that they can work part-time without really worrying about it. A lot of women, even in the good old days, still work part-time jobs in like shops or crafting or something like that. Very rarely in history were women actually full-time housewives. Anyway, I think the biggest black pill from the two-child benefit cap was... I think it was either ITV or BBC went to Bradford to interview people about it, and the one person who was very positive about it was a woman who was not of the native stock, I think is the best way to put it, and she was ecstatic about the fact that the cap had been removed, which obviously a lot of people on the right are quite worried about. This is going to be benefiting non-natives a lot more than natives, and there's a nativish streak that is rising throughout Britain. And it is a natural reaction to the demographic change. I'm sympathetic to it. What can I say? Energy bills. Green levies will be removed from energy bills from next year until 2029, expected to cost about 2.3 billion. Hey, that's hang on, that's a reform policy. They stole a reform policy. It's not all green levies, it will be a number of them, but it is getting ridiculous that to get a load of wind farms in, you have to pay extra in tax, while then it's very much subsidised, and then on top of that, basically a lot of people have been lying about the cheapness of wind farms and solar farms, because they don't take into account the cost of when they are turned off, the cost of having to replace that turned off time with gas and oil. It's a total mess, and I believe there's a policy paper coming out by yours truly, possibly next month. A scheme designed to tackle fuel poverty through energy efficiency has also been scrapped, contributing toward a £150 cut from the average annual household energy bill from April. Possibly the only good part of this budget, by the way. These are two very good policies that I'm completely in favour of. Energy bills are very much not a free market phenomenon. Energy bills are very much the result of largely centralised economies. Hence, pretty much every CEO of every energy company is constantly in talks with the government. It's not as bad as the trains, but it's still very much not a free market. Right, cash ISAs. I don't have a cash ISA, and I don't know anyone who does have a cash ISA, but I do know that Martin Lewis pushes them because he's basically paid to. The amount of money that can be saved tax-free each year in cash ISAs has been cut to $12,000 from April 27 from $20,000. Those aged over 65 will retain the full cash allowance. Oh, great. It's great to be a pensioner. I don't really have an awful lot to say on cash ISAs. I think they're not a great way to actually save your money. Put it in stocks and shares ISAs. They actually do increase with value over time. Cash ISAs interest rates are just way too low to be worth it. Right, savings. Tax rate on dividends, property and savings income will be increased by 2 percentage points, raising $2.1 billion by 2029 and 2030. In other words, if you want to risk your money in a property, in a business, or hell, even just want to save them, apparently. You now have to have an increase of 2 pence on the pound for them. Again, it's another thing that a lot of commentators were saying, even on the centre-left. This is very much disincentivising risk-taking, encouraging people to effectively search for other ways to get income out of just getting a job. It's absolutely ludicrous. Business rates. Tax rates for 750,000 retail and leisure properties will be reduced. Okay. Set to be paid for by an increase in rates of property worth £500,000 or more. The measure will reduce tax receipts by $1.2 billion on average between 2026-27 and 2028-29. Sounds like not an awful idea in theory. I think the theory here is that the small businesses get a tax break while the bigger businesses get a tax rise. You have a bit of a problem here, though, because pub owner Laura Tumshaw, who was a newsreader earlier in life, said, can we talk about the business rate value reassessment, because our pub's gone from £18,500 a year to £73,500 a year. That's an increase of nearly 400%, by the way. The reason for this is because if you own a business in a wealthy area, well, part of your worth is just the building. And given that pubs have to be in relatively large buildings, they tend to be valued more than areas around them. Or houses around them, I should say. And so quite easily you could own a pub where most of the value comes from the land and the building that the pub owns. And I think this is what has happened here. Hospitality is just absolutely ruined. You imagine the only sort of hotel you could own that is worth less than 500,000 is an Airbnb or a bed and breakfast. 2, 3, 4 rooms at most. Which are you trying to encourage that? Because they're still not pubs. I don't really know any pub that isn't worth less than £500,000. Is this intentional or not? It's quite hard to tell. This isn't the first time that Labour have put out a policy that has absolutely ruined pubs. And this has just made it worse. Let alone the fact that there will be other companies that own buildings that need to be relatively large. Small manufacturing plants, for instance. This isn't going to be helpful at all. The point of this, obviously, is to have a more progressive tax system, but this is overkill. This is ridiculous. Anyway, on to fuel duty. It's been frozen for another 5 months, and the 5p cut in fuel duty put in place after the Russian invasion of Ukraine will be gradually unwound. So, yeah, fuel duty is going to go up slightly over time. Not the worst thing in the world, to be honest. But my problem with fuel is that I think it's completely overtaxed, but everyone needs it, so you're never going to see that being cut properly. The weird one is electric vehicles. Electric drivers will be charged 3 pence per mile on top of other road taxes from 2028. The average driver of a battery electric car in 2028, driving 8,500 miles, is expected to be charged £250 in this year. And on top of all other road taxes, which, okay, is slightly cheaper than your average petrol and diesel car, you end up actually going to be paying more for an electric vehicle. You're basically sin taxing electric vehicles while also banning the sale of new internal combustion engine cars in 2030. This is just a mess. Again, this just isn't a free country. I want the steelman argument for why this is not, or why this is a capitalist country. Let's not make it a negative, because this whole budget is making me realise, God, we actually live in a communist hellhole. It's not communist, obviously, but it is very socialist. Oh, it's social democracy. Yep. That's what socialists started calling it, though, isn't it? And the worst part is, if we were explicitly communist, we'd probably actually have a better time. Instead, we have the worst of both worlds. We have the worst parts of capitalism, where you can have runaway monopolies, and then but then that's actually enforced by the worst parts of socialism, which allows for runaway monopolies in the public sector. Again, just look at trains. Why is it always the Department of Transport actually setting how trains are run rather than the operators? Because it's not a free market. Anyway, speaking of trains, rail fares. They've been frozen for a year, promising to save commuters on the more expensive routes more than £300 a year. They're still ridiculously expensive, by the way, so whatever. Alcohol and vapes. Alcohol duty will rise in line with retail price inflation from February, and a flat rate excise duty of £2.20 per 10 millilitre on all vaping liquid will come into effect from October the 1st next year. Don't care about vapes, don't have them, but the alcohol one, again, already overtaxed. They're trying to tax it more, and it's just for fun, little vices that we all have that make everything slightly easier. Gambling tax. Remote gambling duties levied on online casinos will be raised to 40% from 21% from 2026. That's quite an increase, and honestly, again, it's a sin tax, and gambling is quite an addictive vice, one that probably does need better solutions than we have now, where we just have adverts saying, please stop betting if you're not having fun. That's not how you stop an addiction. I think people should be free to gamble, but the thing is, making more of that money go toward tax rather than anything else is not going to stop people from betting. A general betting duty applied to all online sports will be introduced at 25%. Again, just more sin taxes. If I were to do this, I would just level it all out to 25%. 40% seems excessive, but whatever. There will be no changes to the in-person gambling duty of 15% or betting on horse racing, and the 10% duty on bingo will be abolished. Why are they abolishing the bingo duty? That's a weird one. I guess that's to encourage people to go to bingo halls, but is that to help them stay in business? That's a weird one. That's a really weird one, actually. I don't really know what to say about that. Right, moving on. Regional funding. An extra $13 billion will be made for 7 mayors to invest in skills, business support and infrastructure because, again, We live in a capitalist country where it's private investment mainly driving things. An additional £370 million will be allocated to Northern Ireland Executive, £505 million to the Welsh Government, and £820 million to the Scottish Government. Not much to comment on that. That doesn't seem that much, the millions being given to the devolved Parliament. 30 billion extra available for 7 mayors. That seems like an awful lot, but yeah, I don't really know why. Why can't they have the power to tax and spend themselves? That's a bit odd, but there we go. And devolution isn't going away, so you just kind of have to expect this stuff. But yeah, the hundreds of millions to the devolved just doesn't seem that much, so I think we got away with it there. It is also worth pointing out, apparently Sadiq Khan met with Rachel Reeves to ask for more money for London, and she basically screamed at him to get out. So, based Rachel Reeves, about the only thing I will say about her that's positive. The UK economy is now forecast to grow by 1.5% on average this year. Great. The report has revealed higher than 1% growth projected by the OBR in March. However, forecasts for the next 4 years have been downgraded, with gross domestic products expected to increase by 1.4% next year, down from 1.6% forecast in March. And, it's hard to actually say, GDP per capita is going to go down with that. Probably not true, because net migration is actually much lower than it was during the Boris wave. Problem. It's a lot of useful people that are moving out of the country, especially British natives, or British nationals, I should say. And again, plenty of people have anecdotes about that. It's gone from about 80,000 people leaving pre-COVID to about 110,000 leaving every quarter, that is, now. It's a disaster. That's not to say that immigrants aren't going to be useful. You'll obviously have some high-skilled immigrants there. Hell, I work with some of them. But given how immigration has gone over the past 2 decades, doesn't fill me with hope that all of a sudden we're going to have only high-skilled people coming over. But there we go. So that's it for the budget summary. Thank you very much for the Times for getting those key points out there. But this is the big problem we have. I mean, I called this video the worst budget you've ever seen, and it's probably not even that clickbaity. This is pretty woeful. I mean, the Tories had some bad ones, but I don't think they were as bad as try and convince everyone to buy an electric vehicle and then charge them an extra £500 a year if they actually use it. On top of that, the taxing and spending, the taxing is coming in down the line, it's 3-4 years away, whereas the spending's coming in pretty much straight away, so we're going to have to borrow for that. I mean, it's just got to the point of what's the point in working in the UK anymore? Like, seriously, what is the point? And certainly what's the point in being aspirational? I mean, it's been talked about quite a lot recently, especially by Rory Sutherland of all people, where really there isn't aspiration with the young to remain in Britain because everything just feels so out of reach. Getting a car's relatively expensive, buying a property is relatively expensive unless you move to Wales or somewhere else relatively undesirable. I've said it before, but I'm more open to moving abroad than I was 2 years ago. I do things that get bad. Did I think they get this bad? I suppose I kind of expected it. But now that reality's hit you in the face, do I have regrets for my vote for reform? No. But I suppose it would have been slightly nicer if the Tories got in, but then are you just pushing off this disastrous Labour government even further? Yeah, probably. Again, what it's worth bearing in mind, Labour have a historic majority government. It's one of the biggest we've ever seen. We have a government that is then paralysed because the government wants to do one thing because of their advice from the civil service, and the backbenchers have a completely different idea of what they're supposed to be doing. The backbenchers end up winning that argument because ultimately it's not people in Whitehall who decide who's a minister, who's prime minister, who's chancellor and all that. It, at the end of the day, is the Labour Party and the MPs and their members. And who's going to come in after Starmer, because he's definitely going in half a year? Well, someone probably worse. Again, I'm completely with Nigel Farage with the prediction that there will be a market crash that is going to cause an early election, and that's when reform are going to get in. It's another irritating thing, actually. The people who've moved abroad are actually the people quite likely to vote reform. So we also have to bear that in mind, that actually we're incentivised to have an election sooner rather than later, because if it goes too late, too many people are going to leave who would have voted for reform. And then as far as I'm concerned, what's Britain going to do at that point? Hard to say. But the managed decline, everyone's fed up with it, and that's why people are moving to areas that seem to reject the idea that you have to decline forever. Italy, Australia, the US, even Canada to some degree. And yeah, honestly, it used to be a case of when people tell me they're moving abroad, I say, oh no, things will get better here, honestly, I'd stay. And now I'm thinking, well, you're probably going to come back if things get better, right? They say yes, and I say, well, you may as well go then, because things will get better here. I have pretty high faith in that. And hopefully it will start getting better in 2028 rather than 2030. But hell, again, Britain's come back from times like this. Thatcher. And I think reform are going to be Thatcherism 2.0. Thatcherism with the wrinkles creased out. And with a better understanding of why things went wrong after and what needs to be done to, well, return essentially and get rid of the whole Blairite concept of human rights laws. That's the thing that the Reform keeps saying they're going to do, and everyone seems to be sleeping on it. It's one of the biggest counter-revolutionary forces that we've ever seen. Sure, the Tories have said they're finally going to leave the ECHR, but are they going to get rid of the Human Rights Act, do anything about the Equality Act? Nah, they're not. Therefore, on that level alone, vote Reform, blah blah blah, you know what I'm going to say. I think that's enough of this budget, and I would be happy if I don't have to talk about it again. Tomorrow's Friday, isn't it? Let's hope that Politics Joe has something interesting I can go through. Because with that, I think we've covered everything I need to. Reform are good, Tories are pretty good, Labour are dreadful. What more is there to say? Thank you, backbenchers, you have ruined the country. Might write to my MP telling her that. Anyway, I think I'll leave it there. If you enjoy what I do, do subscribe, leave a like, leave a comment. You can also become a channel member and leave super chats and super thanks as you see fit. Wolves of Westminster are out tomorrow. Next week it's going to be more gaming. Wolves of Westminster and laughing at The Guardian. For now, I think I'd like to thank you all very much for watching though, and until next time, goodbye.